3 months back, I was living large in California, in a house worth $4.2 million, with my wife and our kids under the same roof. Now I'm staring at a letter that says my whole life has been nothing but smoke and mirrors, and somehow, the woman who tore me apart may have ended up saving me without even realizing it. My name's Adrian Blake. I'm 47. Up until not long ago, I worked as a commercial insurance adjuster out of Pasadena. My job was sizing up other people's disasters and guiding them through the rebuilding. From the outside, I had what most folks would call the American dream. A beautiful wife, Serena, the woman I'd been married to for 18 years. We had twins, Elias and Lila, smart, sharp, and the heartbeat of my world. We raised them in a hilltop place with a view that stretched across the city like a sea of lights. Back then, I thought I had it all figured out. I was Adrian Blake, son of Helen Blake, a quiet librarian who raised me alone after my dad's car accident took him when I was 12. Dad was supposed to be just an ordinary man, swinging a hammer on construction sites, gone too soon, leaving Mom to hold everything together on a librarian's paycheck. Growing up in Ohio, we didn't have much, but she always made sure I never went without. Mom was the kind of person who never forgot birthdays, kept the family albums in order, and reminded me to eat right and finish my homework. Serena and I met in high school. I was 17, she was 16, and we fell hard the way kids do, with all the fire in us. She was ambitious, striking, the kind of woman who could walk into any room and own it without lifting a finger. After college, she went into real estate, and she thrived there. Together we built a life, one step at a time, one year after the next. The kids came, we chased opportunities west, settled in California, bought the dream house, and put Elias and Lila in private schools. Elias turned into the athlete everyone talked about, 6'2", built solid, like his grandfather had been from what I'd heard. Varsity basketball, college scouts circling before he was even a junior. Lila carried a different spark, more like my mom. She had an artist's eye, could sketch anything, and she made you see the world sideways, in ways you'd never thought to look before. For 47 years, that was my story. That was who I thought I was. Adrian Blake, family man, insurance adjuster, the kid from Ohio who built something real in California. I never once thought to question it. Then the cracks started showing. It was about 18 months ago. Serena began taking calls in the driveway, walking off to answer. She came home late, blaming clients, deals, deadlines. The way she looked at me changed too, like she didn't quite recognize me, like she was studying a stranger. The warmth between us drained, bit by bit, until all that was left was a chill. Even the kids felt it. Elias asked why Mom seemed angry all the time. Lila kept to her room, her drawings growing darker. Families with smiles that still somehow looked broken. I told myself it was stress, maybe a rough patch, maybe midlife. I tried. I really did. Planned dinners, date nights, anything to remind her of us. Nothing landed. If anything, she pulled further away, sharper, colder. Then came the papers. Not just divorce papers, an entire assault on who I was. Her lawyer painted me as a gambling addict with hidden debts. Reckless, unstable, unfit to raise my kids. They had bank records I'd never seen, casino slips with my name scrawled across them, witnesses swearing I'd borrowed money and stiffed them. Every shred of it fake. Still, the evidence piled up like it had been carved in stone. Court was hell. I sat in that room while strangers tore apart my life, talking about me like I was nothing more than a con man. Serena sat there too, stone-faced, refusing to meet my eyes. When the judge handed her everything, the house, custody, even my business, I felt something inside me splinter. But the worst came after. Outside, Serena leaned in with a smile colder than anything I'd ever seen and whispered, "You'll never see Elias and Lila again. I'm moving them to Portland, and you don't have the money to stop me." That's when I realized this wasn't just a broken marriage. It was a deliberate strike, something ruthless and calculated. Within weeks, I'd lost it all, the house, my kids, even my license to work, revoked because of those bogus financial charges. I had nowhere left but Ohio. My mother's old house, standing empty since she passed 2 years earlier. So I packed what was left into my beat-up Honda Civic and drove 1,200 miles back to the town I'd left at 18. That was where the real story began. The trip from California to Ohio took 3 days, and with every mile, I felt like I was being dragged backward through my own life. By the time I pulled into the driveway on Maple Street in Akron, I felt less like a man and more like a ghost circling back to haunt his own past. The place looked just as it had on the day of Mom's funeral. A modest ranch from the 1960s, plain white siding, black shutters, a porch barely big enough for 2 chairs and a table. I could still see her there with her tea and her library books. I sat in the car longer than I care to admit, staring at that house. This was supposed to be temporary. Just to stop to catch my breath, figure out how to piece my life back together. Sitting there in front of that small, unassuming house, I couldn't stop myself from thinking about just how far I'd fallen. Only a few months earlier, I'd been waking up to views of downtown Los Angeles right outside my bedroom window. Now, all I could see were Mrs. Patterson's garden gnomes lined up like soldiers across the street. My mom, Helen Blake, had lived in this house for 35 years. She bought it when I was 12, right after my father's death. She scraped together what little they had, added in the life insurance payout, and signed her name on a mortgage that probably didn't make much sense on paper. To her, though, it wasn't about numbers. It was about hope. She wanted her son to have his own room, a backyard, and some piece of normal childhood. She was the strongest person I've ever known, and she never showed it with big speeches or drama. She just lived it. Mom never remarried. Far as I could tell, she never even dated. She devoted herself to me and her work at the downtown branch of the Akron Public Library. Every morning she'd cook breakfast, pack my lunch, and then make the 6-block walk to her job with her own brown bag lunch in hand. She'd come home each evening with a stack of books tucked under her arm, some for work, some for fun, and always a couple she thought I might like. Somehow, she made our small, ordinary life feel rich. We never had money for trips or resorts, so she invented vacations right in our backyard. She'd set up the old tent, heat cocoa in a thermos, and sit beside me pointing out constellations until I fell asleep under the stars. When I got into building model airplanes, she picked up extra shifts just so she could buy me kits. She'd sit with me at the kitchen table painting the tiniest details, even though her eyesight was never great. What stood out most about my mother was her quiet certainty. She always knew exactly how much was in the checking account, when the bills were due, and somehow what I needed before I knew it myself. She'd been widowed young, left to raise me on her own, but I never saw her break under the weight of it. She handled life with a calm steadiness that made me feel secure in ways I didn't fully understand until I became a father. The strange thing was, we always seemed to have enough. Not a surplus, never extra, but enough. When school started, there was money for new clothes. When the car broke down, she had it fixed. When I said I wanted to go to college, she somehow made that dream real. I asked her once, in my 20s, after I'd just married Serena and finally started realizing how expensive life really was. Mom, how did you do it? How did you manage all of this on what the library paid you? She just gave me that quiet little smile of hers and said, "You find a way when someone you love depends on you." That's what parents do. Unlocking the front door and stepping inside for the first time since her funeral, I was hit by the smell that was uniquely hers, lavender soap mixed with the scent of old books. Everything sat exactly where she'd left it. Her glasses rested on the table beside her chair. A half-read mystery novel, about a librarian who solved crimes, still lay open on the coffee table with a bookmark saving her place. Walking through those rooms, I felt the weight of everything I'd lost pressing down on me like a physical burden. My kids were 1,000 miles away, probably being fed lies about their father. My wife had turned into someone I didn't recognize, someone who seemed to hate me with a fire I couldn't explain. My career was gone. My reputation shredded. My bank account gutted. But standing in that house, my mother's house, filled with her books, her photographs, the quiet dignity of a life built on sacrifice, I made a choice. This was mine now, the one thing Serena and her lawyers couldn't touch. A gift from a woman who had spent her entire life giving me something solid to stand on. My plan was simple: renovate, sell, and pour every cent into fighting for my children. It seemed like the right move at the time. What I didn't know was that my mother had left behind something more valuable than real estate. The divorce itself had been brewing for months. Serena first asked for space 8 months before the papers landed, but I didn't want to believe it. I kept telling myself we could work through it, that it was about us, not something darker. Then came the morning that shattered everything. I'll never forget it. I was going through the same routine I'd had for 15 years. Coffee, shower, trying to kiss my wife goodbye, even though she hadn't really looked at me in months. At 7:30, the doorbell rang. A process server stood there with an envelope that gutted my world in one swing. It wasn't just a petition for divorce. It was a demand for everything. Full custody of Elias and Lila, the house, my business, even my retirement. But worse than the losses were the lies. According to those papers, I was a compulsive gambler drowning in secret debts. The documents claimed I had stolen money from client accounts to feed an addiction I didn't even have. They painted me as unstable, reckless, even dangerous to my own kids. Every word of it was a lie. I'd never stepped foot in a casino. I'd maybe bought 5 scratch-offs in my life. I never even played poker on guys' nights. I'd built my whole career on being steady, reliable, trustworthy. My books were clean. My client accounts spotless. And yet, somehow, Serena's lawyer had evidence for every false claim. That evening, when I confronted her, she was in our bedroom packing boxes like a machine. I held the papers in my hand, shaking. "Serena, what the hell is this?" I asked. "Gambling addiction? Theft? You know damn well none of this is true." She didn't even glance up from the pile of clothes she was folding. "I know what I know, Adrian. The bank statements don't lie." "Bank statements?" I shot back. "Show me these bank statements." That's when she finally turned to face me, and what I saw in her eyes chilled me. It wasn't anger or even hurt. It was something colder, sharper, calculating. In that moment, she looked like a stranger, not the girl I'd met at 17. "You're not the man I married," she said softly. "Maybe you never were." The next 6 weeks passed in a haze of lawyer meetings, documents, and the slow dissection of my life by people who barely knew me. Serena's attorney, a sharp, stylish woman named Elaine Porter, brought forward evidence that looked bulletproof. There were bank records showing withdrawals I never made. Casino receipts with my signature from places I'd never set foot in. Credit card charges from gambling websites I'd never heard of. My own lawyer, David Lynn, a steady, no-nonsense guy I'd worked with on business contracts, kept shaking his head as we sifted through it. "Adrian, I need to ask you straight. Is there any chance some of this is real? If you've been hiding debts, I need to know so I can limit the damage." "Dave, I swear on my kids' lives," I told him. "I've never gambled more than a church raffle ticket. Someone's framing me, and I can't figure out why." But the so-called evidence just kept piling higher. Witness statements claimed I'd borrowed money and stiffed people. A coworker swore he saw me betting on my phone at lunch. Even my neighbor, Calvin Rhodes, the same guy I'd knocked back beers with for years, signed an affidavit saying I'd spiraled into desperation and erratic behavior. The hardest part wasn't the paperwork or the hearings. It was the kids. Elias started slipping away from me, answering my questions with shrugs, spending more time out of the house. Lila still hugged me goodnight, but I could see the doubt in her eyes, the way she was trying to square the father she knew with the man people claimed I was. Then came the custody evaluation. Humiliating doesn't even cover it. Dr. Alvarez, the court-appointed psychologist, spent 3 hours drilling me about my mental health, my finances, my relationship with my children. She was polite, professional, but her eyes told me she'd already bought into Serena's story. "Mr. Blake, addiction often involves denial," she said in that clinical tone. "Many gambling addicts hide their behavior well." "Doctor, I get that," I said. "But I'm not hiding anything because there's nothing to hide. I'm not an addict." She jotted notes and promised my side would go in the report, but I could already feel the walls closing in. The final hearing fell on a gray Tuesday in November. I walked into that courthouse knowing the odds were against me, but still praying that somehow the truth would break through. The courtroom itself was sterile, nothing like what you see in TV dramas. Judge Elaine Winters, a woman in her 60s, presided with the weary look of someone who'd watched families implode for decades. Serena's lawyer delivered her case like a surgeon, records, witnesses, expert testimony, all tying me to a secret gambling habit that had supposedly wrecked everything. My attorney did what he could. He flagged contradictions in statements, questioned suspicious timing, argued that all the evidence was circumstantial. But it was my word against an avalanche of paperwork. The judge wasn't swayed. She gave Serena primary custody, the house, and the bulk of our assets. I was left with supervised visits every other weekend if I completed gambling rehab and financial counseling. When it was over, Serena caught me in the parking lot. She was smiling, when she whispered, "You'll never see Elias and Lila again. I'm moving them to Portland next month, and you don't have the money to stop me." That night, I sat alone in an empty apartment, staring at the walls, trying to understand how my life had turned unrecognizable in less than a year. Moving back into my mother's house felt like stepping into a time capsule. Everything was exactly as she'd left it 2 years earlier. Her coffee cup still sat in the dish rack. Her glasses lay folded on the end table. Even her slippers waited neatly by her bed, as if she'd only stepped out for a moment. For weeks, I barely moved from the living room couch. Every morning, I woke up hoping it had all been a nightmare, that I'd roll over and find Serena beside me, hear the kids getting ready for school down the hall. But then I'd see the water stain on Mom's ceiling and remember, my old life was gone. Depression hit like a freight train. Some days I couldn't shower, couldn't even make coffee. I just lay there, thinking about Elias and Lila, wondering what lies Serena was feeding them. Did they think I'd abandoned them? Did they believe their father was a thief and an addict? After about a month of wallowing, something broke inside me. Maybe it was my mother's voice echoing in my head, reminding me that problems don't solve themselves. Maybe it was just survival. Either way, I realized I had one shot at getting my kids back, and it started with money. The only thing I had left was the house. Mom had kept it in good shape for most of her life, but by the time she passed in her 70s, it was showing its age. The kitchen cabinets were worn. The bathroom needed a full update. The walls begged for fresh paint. If I wanted to fight for my kids, this house had to become more than a memory. It had to become my weapon. If I wanted enough money to fight for my kids in court, this house had to shine. That became my mission. I threw myself into the renovation like a man possessed. I tore down old wallpaper, sanded floors until my arms ached, painted every room fresh. After months of sitting in lawyers' offices feeling powerless, working with my hands felt like therapy. Every nail I drove, every stroke of the brush, was my way of fighting back against the people who had tried to erase me. The basement was my last battleground. Mom had mostly used it for storage, and it was jammed with decades of her life. Christmas decorations, dusty photo albums, even my elementary school projects she'd saved for reasons only she knew. Going through all of it was bittersweet, painful, but grounding. It reminded me of where I came from, the woman who had raised me with honesty, grit, and decency. That's when I noticed something off near the furnace. It sat in one corner of the basement, an old oil unit that had been converted to gas back in the 90s, but never moved from its original spot. The concrete around it looked wrong, different texture, faint scratch marks like something heavy had been dragged recently. I knelt down and studied it. Dust had settled in patterns that didn't add up. It looked as if the furnace had been shifted, and not long ago. But that was impossible. Mom had been gone 2 years, and before that she'd been too frail to move anything heavier than a box of books. The thing had to weigh hundreds of pounds. Yet the evidence was right in front of me. Fresh scuffs on the metal, scratches on the floor, dust displaced like a trail. My heart started hammering. I spent an entire afternoon figuring out how to budget. Disconnecting the gas line scared me half to death, but I managed. Using a furniture dolly, a pry bar, and sheer stubbornness, I inched it 3 feet from the wall. My back screamed, but it was worth it. Behind the furnace, at shoulder height in the concrete wall, was a small safe I'd never known existed. Old-fashioned, square, about 18 inches on each side. Painted the same dull gray as the wall so it blended in. The metal was smooth from use, like it had been opened countless times over the years. No brand name, no markings, just a silent, hidden box. I stared at it for a long time, my mind racing. How long had it been there? Why had my mother never told me? What could possibly be inside that was important enough to hide like this? The combination dial ran from 0 to 99, 10,000 possible combinations. It could take forever, but as I stood there, something from my childhood clicked. Every year on my birthday, March 15th, Mom would call me at exactly 7:23 a.m. Not 7:30, not 7:15. Always 7:23. She said it was the exact minute I'd been born. March 15th, 1977. March 15th, 77. My hands shook as I spun the dial. Right to 03, left to 15, right to 77. For a moment, nothing. Then a soft click. The door swung open. What I found inside flipped my world upside down. The safe was deeper than it looked, and it was stuffed full. The first thing that hit me was the money. Stacks of $100 bills bound with rubber bands. Some yellowed with age, others crisp and new. I pulled them out, counting with trembling hands. $847,000. More cash than I'd ever seen in one place. Under the money were documents. Multiple driver's licenses, all with my mother's face, but different names. Sofia Delgado from New Mexico, Clara Mendoza from Arizona, Julia Harrington from Nevada. The photos showed my mom at different ages, still her, but with a harder edge in her eyes I'd never noticed when she was alive. There were social security cards to match, birth certificates, even a passport for Sofia Delgado dated 1988. Everything looked real. Official, not fake. My quiet librarian mother, Helen Blake, had apparently lived under multiple identities for decades. At the very bottom lay a sealed envelope. My name written on it in her neat, familiar script. My real name, not an alias. Just Adrian, in the handwriting I'd seen on birthday cards and grocery lists my whole life. I sat down hard on the basement floor and tore it open. 3 pages of her handwriting slid out. The first line froze my blood. My dearest Adrian, if you're reading this, they finally found you, and I'm no longer here to protect you. The letter went on to burn everything I thought I knew about my life to ashes. Your real name is Adrian Cortez. Your father didn't die in a car accident when you were 12. His name was Marco Cortez, and he was murdered by the Torino crime family in Chicago on September 18, 1989. I witnessed his murder because I was supposed to die with him. Instead, I ran. I took you and I ran. 3 months later, I testified against the men who killed your father in front of a federal grand jury. I had to stop reading. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the pages. Marco Cortez, not Marco Blake, construction worker killed in an accident. Marco Cortez, murdered by the mob. And my mother hadn't just been a widow scraping by. She'd been a witness in a federal case. The letter continued. We entered the Witness Protection Program in January 1990. I became Helen Blake, you became Adrian Blake, and we disappeared into Akron, Ohio to start over. That's how my mother's letter began the next section. The government gave us new identities, a small settlement to get on our feet, and the promise of safety, as long as we never reached back to our old lives or revealed who we really were. Suddenly, everything about my childhood snapped into focus. The way Mom always seemed to have just enough money despite a librarian's salary. Her refusal to talk about anything before Ohio. The lessons about not trusting strangers too quickly, about keeping personal details to yourself, about always being aware of your surroundings. I'd thought she was just being overprotective. She'd been keeping us alive. She explained that the cash in the safe was what remained of the witness protection settlement, plus decades of careful saving. Then came the part that made my pulse hammer so hard I could hear it in my ears. But Adrian, there's something else, she wrote. Something I discovered too late to warn you properly. She told me she had hired private investigators to keep tabs on me in California 3 years earlier, not out of distrust, but because she'd heard whispers that people were asking about the Cortez family again. What they discovered broke my heart, she wrote. Your wife Serena has been working with people who have been looking for us for decades. They found you first and used her to get close. The room around me tilted. Serena, my high school sweetheart, the mother of my kids, the woman I'd loved for 2 decades, working with the people who murdered my father. Mom wrote that she didn't know whether Serena fully understood what she was caught up in, or whether she'd been manipulated the same way they'd tried to manipulate me. But the divorce, the gambling accusations, every false charge, they were all designed to destroy me emotionally and financially, to push me back to Ohio. They wanted to drive you to the one place where they knew I might have left something, she explained, something that could lead them to other witnesses or evidence from the original case. I felt sick reading it. Everything that had happened over the past year, losing my house, my reputation, my children, had been orchestrated by people hunting my family for 30 years. But Mom hadn't just left me money and the truth. She'd left me a weapon. There's a phone number at the bottom of this letter, she wrote. Call Marshal Gregory Shaw with the U.S. Marshal's Service. He's been waiting for this call since the day I died. Tell him you're Marco Cortez's son and you're ready to finish what we started. The number was written in red ink, underlined 3 times. Beneath it, a final message. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you while I was alive. I wanted you to have a normal life, to be happy without looking over your shoulder, but I always knew this day might come. You are stronger than you know, Adrian. You come from a line of people who don't back down even when the odds are against them. Your father would be proud of the man you've become. I know I am. Use the money wisely. Get your children back. And remember, sometimes the worst thing that happens to you leads you exactly where you need to be. I sat on that basement floor for an hour, the letter limp in my hands, trying to process it all. My life had been a lie, but not a lie meant to diminish me. It was a lie meant to protect me until I was strong enough to hear the truth. Then I picked up my phone and dialed the number. Marshal Gregory Shaw answered on the second ring, as if he'd been sitting by the phone for 35 years. Shaw. Marshal Shaw. This is Adrian Blake. I hesitated. But I think my real name is Adrian Cortez. A long pause. Then a deep breath. Son, I've been waiting for this call since your mother died. Where are you right now? I'm in my mother's house in Akron, sitting next to an open safe she left for me. Don't touch anything else. Don't talk to anyone. And don't leave that house. I'll be there in 4 hours. 4 hours later, Marshal Shaw walked through my front door. He was tall, gray-haired, early 60s, with the look of a man who had seen every kind of evil and still hadn't gotten used to it. 2 other federal agents came with him. They spent 6 hours combing through everything, photographing documents, cataloging evidence, asking me about my life in California. Your mother was one of the bravest people I ever worked with, Shaw said around midnight as we sat at her kitchen table. She knew they'd eventually track you down, so she prepared for this day. The money, the safe combination using your birthday, hiring investigators to watch you. She wanted you to find all of this exactly when you needed it most. What he told me next was worse than anything I'd imagined. The Torino crime family had been hunting down witnesses from my father's murder trial for decades, but they'd changed tactics. Killing people brought too much federal attention. Instead, they'd learned to destroy lives quietly, compromising the people closest to their targets and using them to create chaos and financial ruin. They've been working on your case for at least 5 years, Shaw explained. They found Serena through her real estate connections, people who knew the right kind of criminals. They probably approached her as legitimate clients at first, then slowly turned it into something else. My mother's investigators had been building their own counter case during that time, documenting everything. They had recordings of Serena meeting with people tied to the Torino organization. They had everything: records of money changing hands, forged documents, witnesses being paid off to lie about me. Marshal Shaw laid it out plainly. The gambling addiction story, the fake bank statements, every piece of it had been manufactured. They've run the same playbook on 6 other witnesses in the last 15 years, he told me. They tear your life apart on paper, destroy your credibility, then wait for you to crawl back to the one place they can corner you. But this time, they hadn't counted on something. My mother's death 2 years earlier had triggered quiet protocols inside the Marshal Service. They'd been monitoring the situation all along, waiting to see if anyone would sniff around the Ohio house. We've had surveillance on this neighborhood since the day she passed, Shaw admitted. We knew if they forced you back here, eventually they'd show their hand. We've been watching everyone who came too close. The real shock came the next morning. Serena was arrested in a Portland hotel at 6 a.m. 3 men who had been shadowing her were picked up too. She'd believed she was working with private investigators helping her build a stronger divorce case. She never realized they were tied to organized crime until federal agents sat her down and told her. She's agreed to testify, Shaw said over coffee. Turns out she's as much a victim as you are. They convinced her you were hiding gambling debts and cheating. They showed her forged records, scared her, and promised they'd help her protect the kids and her future. The hardest thing I ever did was call my children. They were in Portland with Serena's sister, confused and frightened, nobody telling them the truth. Dad. Elias's voice was small, stripped of all the confidence I knew in him. Hey, buddy. I know this doesn't make sense right now, but listen to me. Everything's going to be okay. Your mom and I both love you. None of this is your fault. When Lila got on the phone, her question cut me in half. Are you really a gambling addict? Mom said you stole money. That's why we had to move. No, sweetheart, I told her. I never gambled. I never stole. Bad people lied to hurt our family. But they've been caught. We'll be together again soon. It took 6 months to sort out the wreckage. My mother's investigators had left a trail of evidence. Combined with Serena's testimony and the federal case against the Torinos, it cleared my name. The so-called gambling records were exposed as forgeries. Witnesses recanted. My insurance license was reinstated with a formal apology from the state board. Serena and I will never be what we once were. Too many lies, too much broken trust. But we're working side by side now, for the kids. She's in therapy, wrestling with the guilt of being manipulated into tearing her own family apart. I'm in therapy too, trying to learn how to trust again. But we got Elias and Lila back, and that's what matters. The Ohio house sold for enough to buy a smaller place in California and start college funds for both kids. Elias is back on the basketball team. His coach says colleges are still interested despite the chaos of his junior year. Lila's drawings are brighter these days, more color, more hope, even if her pictures still show families who've weathered storms. I think of my mother every single day, of the sacrifice she made to give me a normal childhood, of the courage it took to testify against murderers and then live 35 years in the shadows. She saved me twice, once at 12 and again at 47. And I never got to thank her for either. The Torino case goes to trial next year. I'll be testifying, just like my mother did all those years ago. But this time I won't be running afterward. This time, we finish what she started. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is the very thing that puts you where you're meant to be. My mother knew that. And even from the grave, she made sure she could still protect her son. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Drop a comment and tell me about a time your family protected you in ways you didn't understand until later. And if you want to hear more stories about ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances, subscribe and hit that notification bell. Thanks for listening. And remember, sometimes the people who love us most are fighting battles we never see.